Some people say miracles don't happen anymore. They say the world's too broken, too cold for real heroes to exist. But they never met Jake Sullivan, a weathered cowboy whose calloused hands and grieving heart held more tenderness than most people ever know. On a dusty September morning in rural Montana, Jake's life collided with 15-year-old Sarah Mitchell's nightmare. What started as a routine feed delivery to a neighboring ranch became the moment that would define both their lives forever. Because sometimes, when darkness seems absolute, light comes wearing worn boots and carrying decades of pain that somehow transforms into purpose. This isn't just a story about rescue. It's about two broken souls who found healing in protecting each other. It's about a man who lost everything learning that love doesn't end with death, it multiplies. And it's about a girl who survived hell discovering that family isn't always blood, and home isn't always where you're born. Their journey will break your heart and rebuild it stronger. Because real love, the kind that changes everything, often begins with the simple decision to stay when everyone else has walked away. Jake Sullivan's boots crunched against the gravel as he stepped out of his pickup truck, the September sun beating down on his weathered face. The Mitchell Ranch looked like every other struggling farm in Montana, paint peeling from the barn, fences held together with hope and wire, and that particular silence that comes from dreams slowly dying. He'd been delivering feed to Tom Mitchell for 3 years now, ever since his wife Emma passed from cancer. The work kept his hands busy and his mind off the empty house that waited for him each evening. Tom always paid on time and never asked questions about why Jake looked like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. But something felt different today. Jake grabbed 2 heavy bags of grain from the truck bed, muscles straining under the weight. At 52, his body reminded him daily of decades spent breaking horses and mending fences. The physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache in his chest that had been his constant companion for 2 years. "Tom," he called out, heading toward the barn. No answer came back, which wasn't unusual. Tom often worked in the far pastures this time of day. That's when he heard it. A sound that made his blood run cold. Crying. Quiet, desperate crying coming from inside the house. Jake set the feed bags down and listened. The sound came again, muffled sobs that spoke of pain far deeper than any physical wound. He'd heard that kind of crying before, in the hospital room where Emma had fought her final battle. But this wasn't the cry of someone facing death. This was the cry of someone wishing for it. He approached the house slowly, his cowboy boots making deliberate noise on the wooden porch steps. "Hello? Anyone home?" His voice carried the authority of a man used to handling difficult situations with nervous horses and stubborn cattle. The crying stopped abruptly. Jake knocked on the screen door, peering through the mesh into the dim interior. "Tom? It's Jake Sullivan with your feed delivery." A small voice, barely a whisper, came from somewhere inside. "He's not here." "Who's not here, honey?" Jake's tone softened immediately. He recognized fear when he heard it, and this voice carried more fear than any 15-year-old should know. Silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. "I'm just going to set this feed in the barn then," Jake said gently. "If you need anything, I'll be right outside." He heard movement inside, cautious footsteps on creaky floorboards. Through the screen, he caught a glimpse of blonde hair and what looked like a split lip before she disappeared back into the shadows. Jake's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough hurt animals to recognize the signs of abuse, and what he'd just witnessed made his hands clench into fists. But he forced himself to move slowly, to think before acting. Scared creatures, whether they had 4 legs or 2, needed patience, not aggression. He loaded the feed into the barn, taking his time and staying alert for any sounds from the house. The building told its own story of neglect. Tools lay scattered and rusty. The stalls hadn't been mucked in weeks. This wasn't the ranch of a man who cared about his responsibilities. When Jake emerged from the barn, he found her sitting on the back porch steps. Sarah Mitchell looked like a ghost of the vibrant teenager she should have been. Her blonde hair hung limp around a face marked by more than just the split lip he'd glimpsed earlier. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and the way she held herself, arms wrapped tight around her knees, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger, told Jake everything he needed to know. Hi there, he said, maintaining his distance and keeping his voice gentle. I'm Jake Sullivan. I deliver feed to your dad. She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much. I know who you are. Dad talks about you sometimes. Nothing too terrible, I hope. Jake attempted a smile, trying to coax even the smallest response from her. The ghost of a smile flickered across her face before disappearing. He says you mind your own business. Generally speaking, that's true. Jake leaned against the porch railing, careful not to crowd her space. But I'm having trouble minding my own business right now. Sarah's body tensed, and she looked toward the road as if calculating distances and escape routes. Easy now, Jake said, the same tone he used with spooked horses. I'm not here to cause trouble for anyone. But that lip of yours looks painful. Her hand flew to her mouth, fingers touching the swollen flesh. I fell. Uh-huh. Jake nodded, not believing a word of it but not challenging her either. Seems like you've been doing a lot of falling lately. The tears came then, silent streams down her cheeks that she tried desperately to wipe away. Please don't say anything. He'll be mad if he knows I talked to you. Jake's heart broke a little more. Where is your dad right now, Sarah? How do you know my name? Small town. People talk. Jake crouched down so he was at her eye level. Where is he? Town. He goes to Murphy's bar most afternoons. The words came out reluctantly, as if she was betraying a dangerous secret. Jake knew Murphy's. It was the kind of place where men went to drink away their failures and rage. The kind of place where anger fermented into violence and came home looking for a target. How long has he been hitting you? The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a grass fire. Sarah's eyes went wide with panic. I never said you don't have to say anything. Jake's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. I've got eyes, and I've seen enough of the world to know what I'm looking at. She crumbled then, the careful facade she'd been maintaining collapsing like a dam bursting. The sobs that came from her small frame seemed too big for her body to contain. Jake wanted nothing more than to gather her up and promise her safety, but he knew better than to move too fast. Instead, he sat down on the porch steps a careful distance away and waited for the storm to pass. When her crying finally subsided, Sarah wiped her nose on her sleeve and looked at him with eyes that seemed decades older than her 15 years. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, Jake answered honestly. But I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw. Please. The word came out as a whisper. He's all I have. If you call the police or social services, they'll take me away and put me in some home with strangers. At least here I know what to expect. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. This child had been so broken by her circumstances that she preferred the devil she knew to the possibility of salvation. How long has your mama been gone? He asked gently. 3 years. Cancer took her quick. Sarah's voice went flat, emotionless. Dad started drinking heavy after the funeral. At first, he just yelled a lot. Then, he started pushing me around when I couldn't keep up with all the work. Now. She didn't finish the sentence, but Jake didn't need her to. Sarah, honey, what you're describing isn't normal. It's not love, and it's not your fault. You don't understand. Her voice rose with desperation. He's not always bad. Sometimes he cries and says he's sorry. Sometimes he brings me candy from town and tells me stories about when Mom was alive. He's just hurt and sad and taking it out on you, Jake finished firmly. There's no excuse for what he's doing, Sarah. None. The sound of a truck engine in the distance made them both freeze. Sarah's face went white with terror. That's him, she whispered, scrambling to her feet. You have to go. Please, just go. Jake stood slowly, his mind racing. He couldn't leave her here, not now that he knew what was happening. But he also couldn't force her to come with him. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. I'm going to leave you my card, he said, pulling a business card from his wallet. It has my phone number on it. If you need help, any kind of help, you call me. Day or night. Sarah took the card with trembling fingers and shoved it deep into her pocket just as Tom Mitchell's battered Ford came into view. Please, she whispered one more time. Jake nodded and walked back to his truck, but he didn't drive away immediately. He wanted Tom Mitchell to see him, to know that someone else was aware of Sarah's existence. Sometimes, the knowledge that you're being watched was enough to make a person think twice about their actions. Tom climbed out of his truck, already unsteady on his feet despite it being only mid-afternoon. He was a big man gone soft around the middle, with the red-rimmed eyes and broken capillaries of a serious drinker. But Jake could see echoes of the man he used to be, the kind of neighbor who would help with a barn raising or lend a hand during calving season. Jake, Tom nodded, his speech slightly slurred. Thanks for bringing the feed. No problem, Tom. Sarah here was keeping me company while I loaded it. Tom's eyes narrowed as he looked between Jake and his daughter. Sarah had gone completely still, like a deer sensing a predator. She say anything interesting? Tom's voice carried a warning that made Jake's hands curl into fists. Just that you were in town. Nice kid. Polite. Jake kept his voice level and casual, but his eyes never left Tom's face. You're lucky to have her. Something flickered in Tom's expression, shame, maybe, or guilt. For just a moment, Jake saw the father Tom might have been under different circumstances. Yeah, Tom said quietly. I am. Jake climbed into his truck and started the engine, but he rolled down the window before pulling away. Tom, if you ever need to talk to someone who understands loss, you know where to find me. It was a lifeline thrown into dark water, though Jake wasn't sure Tom was ready to grab it. As he drove away, Jake watched in his rearview mirror as Tom walked toward the house, his gait unsteady but his posture somehow deflated. Sarah remained on the porch, small and vulnerable, until her father disappeared inside. That night, Jake sat in his empty kitchen, staring at the phone and thinking about the broken girl he'd left behind. Emma's picture smiled at him from the mantelpiece, and he could almost hear her voice urging him to do something, anything, to help. But what could he do? Call the police and risk Sarah being placed in a system that might be no better than what she was already enduring? Confront Tom directly and risk making things worse for her? Jake had been a cowboy his whole life. He understood the code of the range: you helped your neighbors, you minded your own business, and you didn't interfere in family matters unless invited. But that code had been written by men who assumed families were safe havens, not war zones. He thought about Sarah's eyes, ancient with pain and fear. He thought about the way she'd protected her father even while bearing the marks of his violence. And he thought about Emma, who had always believed that love meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The phone rang at 2 a.m. Jake was awake instantly, his heart hammering as he reached for the receiver. Late-night calls meant emergencies, sick animals, accidents, or worse. Hello? Silence, then, the sound of quiet crying. Sarah? Jake's voice was gentle but alert. Sarah, is that you? I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know who else to call. You don't need to apologize, honey. What's wrong? Are you hurt? He's really mad. Madder than I've ever seen him. He found your card in my pocket and he thinks I told you things. Jake's blood ran cold. Where are you now? In the barn. I ran when he started throwing things. But he's still yelling, and I don't know what to do. Listen to me carefully, Jake said, already reaching for his boots. Can you get to the road without him seeing you? I think so. Maybe. There's an old oak tree about a quarter-mile down from your driveway, on the left side of the road. Big enough to hide behind. Can you make it there? Yes. Good. I'm coming to get you right now. It'll take me 20 minutes, maybe less. You stay hidden until you see my truck. What if he comes looking for me? Then, you run toward town and don't look back. But, Sarah? I won't let him hurt you anymore. That's a promise. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was small but determined. "Okay. I'll be there." Jake hung up the phone and grabbed his jacket, his mind already working through the logistics of what he was about to do. He was crossing a line, inserting himself into a situation that could have serious legal and personal consequences. But, as he started his truck and pulled out onto the dark county road, Jake thought about Emma and the way she had faced her final days with courage and grace. She had taught him that love wasn't just a feeling, it was action, sometimes risky and always requiring sacrifice. 23 years of marriage to that woman had shown him what it meant to be truly needed by another person. Now, for the first time since her death, someone needed him again. He pressed down on the accelerator and drove through the Montana night toward a 15-year-old girl who had nothing left but hope that a weathered cowboy would keep his promise. Jake's headlights cut through the darkness as he approached the old oak tree. His heart pounded with each mile, wondering if Sarah had made it safely or if Tom had caught her trying to escape. The clock on his dashboard showed 2:47 a.m., and the empty road stretched before him like a prayer answered. There, a small figure crouched behind the massive trunk, barely visible in the shadows. Jake pulled over and left his engine running, stepping out slowly so as not to startle her. "Sarah?" "It's Jake." She emerged from behind the tree like a frightened deer, clutching a small backpack to her chest. Even in the dim light from his headlights, Jake could see fresh bruises on her face and arms. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut. "Oh, honey," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah ran to him then, her reserve finally cracking. Jake opened his arms and let her collapse against him, her small frame shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. "I've got you," Jake murmured, one hand gently stroking her hair while the other held her steady. "I've got you now." They stood there in the middle of the empty road for several minutes, Jake letting her cry out 2 years' worth of fear and pain while he struggled with his own emotions. The protective instinct that had lain dormant since Emma's death roared to life with an intensity that surprised him. When Sarah's sobs finally subsided, Jake gently pulled back to look at her face. The damage was worse than he'd first thought. Tom Mitchell had used his fists with a precision that spoke of practice. "We need to get you to a hospital," Jake said carefully. "No." Sarah pulled away, panic flashing in her eyes. "No hospitals. They'll ask questions and call the police and, Sarah, you need medical attention. Please." She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "I know it looks bad, but I'm okay. Really. I just need somewhere safe to think." Jake studied her face, seeing past the bruises to the determination beneath. This girl had survived hell for 2 years by being smart and careful. He had to trust her judgment about her own condition. "All right," he said finally. "But if you start feeling dizzy or sick, we go to the hospital immediately. Deal?" Sarah nodded gratefully and climbed into his truck. As they drove toward his ranch, Jake glanced over at her periodically. She sat pressed against the passenger door, her backpack clutched in her lap like armor. "What's in the bag?" he asked gently, trying to ease the tension. "Everything that matters to me." Sarah's voice was quiet but steady. "Pictures of my mom. Some clothes. A book she used to read to me when I was little." Jake's throat tightened. This child had packed her entire life into a backpack smaller than what most people took on a weekend trip. His ranch came into view as they crested the hill, a modest spread with a well-maintained house, barn, and several outbuildings. Jake had built most of it himself over the years, with Emma's help and encouragement. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and warm and safe. "This is beautiful," Sarah said, the first spark of something other than fear in her voice since he'd found her. "Emma and I put a lot of love into this place." Jake pulled into the circular drive in front of the house. "She'd be happy to know it's helping someone who needs it." Jake led Sarah up the front steps and into his home. The living room was comfortable but clearly the domain of a man living alone, a few too many newspapers stacked on the coffee table, boots by the door, and Emma's touch still visible in the quilts and family photos scattered throughout. "You must miss her terribly," Sarah said, studying a wedding photo on the mantelpiece. "Every day," Jake admitted. But, having you here, I think she'd approve. Sarah turned to face him, and, for the first time that night, she smiled. It was small and tentative, but it transformed her entire face. The guest room is upstairs, Jake said. Fresh sheets and towels in the closet. Bathroom's right next door. You get some rest, and we'll figure everything out in the morning. Jake? Sarah's voice stopped him at the bottom of the stairs. Thank you. For believing me. For coming to get me. For everything. You don't need to thank me, honey. This is what families do for each other. The word family hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than either of them was ready to acknowledge. The next morning, Jake woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. He found Sarah in his kitchen, standing at the stove with her back to him. She'd found one of his old flannel shirts to wear over her torn clothes, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that made her look even younger than her 15 years. You didn't have to cook, Jake said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered him. I wanted to. I like cooking when it's for someone who appreciates it. Sarah's smile was shy but genuine. Dad never cared much about food. Said I was wasting time making things fancy when beans from a can were good enough. Jake took a bite of the perfectly cooked eggs and bacon. This is restaurant quality, Sarah. Where did you learn to cook like this? Mom taught me before she got sick. She said cooking was one of the ways we show people we love them. Sarah's expression grew wistful. After she died, I kept cooking because it made me feel close to her. Dad didn't care, but it mattered to me. Well, it matters to me too. This is the best breakfast I've had in 2 years. They ate in comfortable silence, the morning sun streaming through the kitchen windows and casting everything in golden light. For a moment, Jake could almost imagine this was normal, a father and daughter sharing breakfast before starting their day. But reality intruded when Sarah winced as she reached for the salt shaker. Let me take a look at those ribs, Jake said, his voice gentle but firm. Sarah hesitated, then slowly lifted the borrowed shirt to reveal a tapestry of bruises across her left side. Jake's jaw clenched as he took in the extent of her injuries. Sarah, honey, I think you might have some cracked ribs. We really should, no hospitals, she said quickly. Please. I know how to take care of bruises and cuts. I've been doing it for 2 years. The casual way she said it broke Jake's heart all over again. All right. But I'm calling Doc Harrison. He's a friend of mine, retired veterinarian who still makes house calls for folks who can't get to town easily. He'll be discreet. Sarah looked uncertain. Won't he have to report it? Doc understands that sometimes people need help without complications. Let me worry about that. Doc Harrison arrived an hour later, a kind-faced man in his 70s who had delivered half the babies in the county before retiring. Jake had called in a favor, explaining only that he had a young friend who needed medical attention but couldn't go to the hospital. Well now, Doc said after examining Sarah's injuries, you've been through quite an ordeal, young lady. Good news is nothing's broken, though those ribs are badly bruised. You'll be sore for a few weeks, but time will heal the physical damage. He pulled Jake aside as Sarah got dressed. Jake, I've seen enough injuries in my time to know the difference between an accident and intentional harm. That girl's been systematically beaten. I know, Jake said quietly. What are you planning to do about it? I'm still figuring that out. Doc Harrison studied his old friend's face. You know I have to ask, is she safe here? Safer than she's been in 2 years, Jake replied without hesitation. Good enough for me. But, Jake? Whatever you decide to do, you'll need legal help. This situation is more complicated than just providing shelter. After Doc left, Jake found Sarah in the living room, curled up on the couch with the book from her backpack. She looked small and vulnerable, but there was something different about her now, a sense of peace that hadn't been there the night before. What are you reading? He asked, settling into his recliner. Little Women. Mom used to read it to me every night before bed. I never finished it after she died because it made me too sad. Sarah looked up at him. But, being here, it doesn't hurt as much to remember the good times. Jake understood. After Emma died, he'd avoided everything that reminded him of her. Only recently had he been able to look through their photo albums without falling apart. "Sarah, we need to talk about what happens next," Jake said gently. "Your father is probably looking for you. The police might get involved. We need to have a plan." Sarah's expression grew troubled. "I know I can't stay here forever. I'll find somewhere else to go. Maybe I can get a job in town, find a room to rent." "Whoa, slow down there," Jake interrupted. "You're 15 years old. You should be worrying about homework and friends, not finding a job and a place to live." "But I can't go home. And I won't go into foster care." Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. Jake leaned forward in his chair. "What if there was another option? What if you could stay here, legally and permanently?" Sarah's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean adoption. Or guardianship, at least. If your father would agree to it, or if we could prove he's unfit." Jake's voice trailed off as he saw the expression on Sarah's face. Hope. Pure, desperate hope mixed with fear that it might be too good to be true. "You would do that? For me?" "Sarah, in the last 24 hours, you've brought more life into this house than it's seen in 2 years. Emma and I always wanted children, but it never happened for us. Maybe this is the universe's way of giving us both what we need." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but, for the first time since Jake had known her, they were tears of joy. "But what about Dad? He'll never agree to it. And what if the courts don't think you're suitable to be my guardian?" "We'll cross those bridges when we come to them," Jake said. "First, we need to get you enrolled in school and start building a case that this is what's best for you." The next few weeks fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Jake taught Sarah to ride his gentlest horse, a mare named Buttercup who seemed to understand that her new rider needed patience and encouragement. Sarah threw herself into ranch work with an enthusiasm that impressed Jake. She was up before dawn helping with chores, spent afternoons practicing her riding, and still managed to cook meals that rivaled anything Emma had ever made. But it was the evenings Jake treasured most. They would sit on the front porch after dinner, Sarah reading while Jake worked on tack repairs, both of them content in each other's company. Sometimes she would ask him about Emma, and Jake found that talking about his wife to someone who genuinely wanted to know brought healing instead of pain. "She would have loved you," Jake told Sarah one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "She had a way of seeing the best in people, especially young people. She taught Sunday school for 20 years because she believed every child deserved to know they were special." "I wish I could have met her," Sarah said softly. "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman." "She was. And she would have been proud of how brave you've been. It takes real courage to leave everything you know, even when you know it's not good for you." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes I feel guilty. For leaving him alone. For not trying harder to help him get better." "Sarah, look at me." Jake's voice was firm but kind. "You are not responsible for your father's choices. You didn't make him drink, and you didn't make him violent. The only person you're responsible for is yourself." "I know that up here," Sarah tapped her temple. "But it's harder to believe it in here." She placed her hand over her heart. "That'll come with time," Jake assured her. "Healing isn't just about the bruises you can see." Their peaceful existence was shattered on a Thursday afternoon when Tom Mitchell showed up at the ranch. Jake was in the barn when he heard the truck approaching. Sarah was in the house, working on correspondence courses Jake had enrolled her in until they could figure out the school situation. Through the barn door, Jake watched Tom climb out of his vehicle, and his heart sank. The man looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, and radiating the kind of desperate energy that made smart people step back. Jake walked out to meet him, positioning himself between Tom and the house. "Tom," Jake nodded, his voice carefully neutral. "I want my daughter back," Tom said without preamble. His words were slurred, and Jake could smell the alcohol on him from 6 feet away. "She's not your property, Tom. She's my blood. My family. You got no right keeping her from me. Jake studied the other man's face, looking for any sign of the reasonable neighbor he used to know. What he saw instead was a man who had lost himself so completely in grief and alcohol that he couldn't recognize the damage he was causing. She's safe here, Tom. She's happy. Isn't that what matters? What matters is that she's my daughter, and I'm taking her home. Tom's voice rose, and he took a step toward Jake. Sarah. Sarah, get out here. Keep your voice down, Jake said firmly. You're drunk, and you're not thinking straight. Don't tell me how to think. I know what you're doing here, Sullivan. Playing the hero, trying to steal my kid because you couldn't have any of your own. The words hit Jake like a physical blow, but he kept his expression steady. This isn't about me, Tom. It's about Sarah. Where is she? Tom pushed past Jake toward the house. Sarah. Get your things. We're going home. Jake caught Tom's arm, his grip firm but not violent. You're not going anywhere near that house while you're drunk. Tom spun around, swinging wildly. Jake ducked the clumsy punch and grabbed Tom by the shoulders, holding him at arm's length. Tom, listen to me. Look at yourself. Look at what you've become. Is this the man your wife would want raising her daughter? Something flickered in Tom's eyes at the mention of his wife. Pain, maybe even recognition of the truth in Jake's words. You don't know what it's like, Tom whispered, the fight going out of him suddenly. Losing her. Watching her waste away while I couldn't do anything to help. Coming home to that empty house every day. You're right, Jake said gently, his grip on Tom's shoulders loosening. I do know exactly what it's like. But, Tom, your daughter needed you to be strong for her, and instead you made her a target for your pain. Tom's face crumpled, and for a moment Jake saw the broken man behind the bluster and violence. I never meant to hurt her, Tom sobbed. Everything hurts so much, and the drinking makes it stop for a while, but then I get so angry about everything, and she's there, and... I know, Jake said quietly. But intentions don't heal bruises, Tom. They don't take away the fear in a child's eyes. Tom straightened up, wiping his face with his sleeve. I want to see her. I want to apologize. Jake considered this carefully. Sarah deserved the chance to hear her father's apology, but she also deserved to feel safe. She's been through enough trauma, Tom. If you want to see her, you need to be sober. Completely sober. And it needs to be on her terms, when she's ready. Tom nodded reluctantly. What do I need to do? Get help. Real help. There's a treatment center in Billings. Check yourself in, do the work, and prove that you can be the father Sarah needs. And if I do that? You'll let me see her? Jake looked toward the house, where he could see Sarah's face in the window, pale and frightened. Tom, I think you need to ask yourself what's really best for Sarah. Is it going back to a house where she lived in fear? Or is it knowing that she's safe and loved while you get your life together? Tom followed Jake's gaze to the window where Sarah stood. Even from a distance, they could see her trembling. She's afraid of me, Tom whispered, the reality of what he had done finally hitting home. Yes, she is. But, Tom? Fear doesn't have to be forever. People can change if they want to badly enough. Tom stood there for a long moment, swaying slightly, his eyes fixed on his daughter's face. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken but determined. I'll go to Billings. I'll get help. But, Jake? You take good care of her. She's all I got left of her mother. I will, Jake promised. You have my word. Tom climbed back into his truck and drove away without another word. Jake watched until the vehicle disappeared over the hill, then turned to find Sarah standing on the porch. Is he gone? She asked, her voice small. He's gone, Jake confirmed, walking toward her. Did you hear what he said? About getting help? I did. How do you feel about that? Sarah considered the question carefully. Hopeful. But scared too. What if he doesn't follow through? What if he gets help but still wants me to come home? Jake climbed the porch steps and sat down beside her. Sarah, I need you to know something. Whatever happens with your father, whatever decisions get made, you will always have a place here with me. That's not conditional on anything. It's just true. Sarah leaned against him, and Jake wrapped his arm around her shoulders. I love you, Jake, she said quietly. Not because you saved me, but because you see who I really am underneath all the damage. Jake's eyes filled with tears. I love you too, kiddo. More than I ever thought possible. They sat together on the porch as the sun set, both of them understanding that their relationship had just crossed an invisible line from temporary refuge to permanent family. There would be legal battles ahead, paperwork and court dates and social workers who would need convincing. But, in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was a broken cowboy and a damaged girl who had found healing in taking care of each other. 6 months later, Jake stood in the hallway outside family court, adjusting his tie for the third time. He'd worn his best suit, the same one he'd married Emma in, and his hands shook slightly as he checked his watch. Today would determine whether Sarah could officially become his daughter through legal guardianship. Sarah sat on the bench beside him, wearing a blue dress they'd bought together for the occasion. She looked older somehow, a haunted expression that had once dominated her features replaced by something Jake could only describe as hope tempered with wisdom. You nervous? She asked, noticing his fidgeting. Terrified, Jake admitted with a rueful smile. You? Same. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. But, it's a good kind of scared. Like right before you get on a horse you've never ridden, scary but exciting. Their lawyer, Margaret Chen, appeared in the hallway carrying a thick folder of documents. Over the past months, she had become more than just their legal representation, she was their advocate and, Jake suspected, their friend. How are we feeling? Margaret asked, settling beside them. Like we're about to find out if Christmas is real, Sarah said, which made both adults smile despite their nerves. Well, I have good news. Tom Mitchell signed the final papers yesterday. He's officially relinquishing his parental rights and supporting your petition for guardianship. Jake felt Sarah's hand tighten in his. This was what they'd hoped for but hadn't dared count on. Tom had indeed checked himself into the treatment center in Billings. For 4 months, he'd worked through his grief, his alcoholism, and the guilt of what he'd done to his daughter. Jake had driven Sarah to visit him twice, carefully supervised meetings where Tom had apologized with tears streaming down his face and Sarah had found the strength to forgive him. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean returning to a situation that had nearly destroyed her. He wants what's best for me, Sarah had explained to Jake after their last visit. And he knows that's not him. Not yet, anyway. Maybe not ever. It was a mature decision from a girl who had been forced to grow up too fast, but Jake was proud of her wisdom and her capacity for grace. Sarah Mitchell, the bailiff, called from the courtroom door. They stood together, Sarah smoothing her dress and Jake straightening his shoulders. As they walked into the courtroom, Jake caught sight of several familiar faces in the gallery. Doc Harrison sat in the front row, along with Mrs. Peterson from the local library where Sarah had been volunteering. Behind them were neighbors and friends who had watched their unconventional family form and had come to show their support. Judge Maria Santos was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who had a reputation for being tough but fair. She studied the papers before her for several long minutes before looking up at Jake and Sarah. Mr. Sullivan, you're requesting legal guardianship of Sarah Mitchell, with the biological father's consent and support. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Jake replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. And, Sarah, you're 15 years old. Old enough to have a voice in this decision. Is guardianship with Mr. Sullivan what you want? Sarah stood up, her back straight and her voice clear. Yes, Your Honor. Jake Sullivan has given me something I never had before, a home where I feel safe and loved. He's taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to take care of each other every single day. Judge Santos nodded thoughtfully. I've reviewed the reports from social services, the statements from your teachers and counselors, and the character references provided for Mr. Sullivan. The consensus seems to be that this arrangement has been beneficial for both of you. She paused, her gaze moving between them. However, I want to be clear about what this means. Mr. Sullivan, you're taking on full legal and financial responsibility for a teenager. That includes college planning, medical decisions, and all the challenges that come with raising a child who has experienced significant trauma. Are you prepared for that? Your Honor, I've been preparing for that responsibility every day for the past 6 months, Jake replied. Sarah isn't just someone I'm helping, she's my daughter in every way that matters. I'm not taking this on as a burden. I'm embracing it as a privilege. Judge Santos smiled for the first time since they'd entered the courtroom. Sarah, do you have anything else you'd like to say? Sarah stood again, and, when she spoke, her voice carried the strength of someone who had survived the worst life could offer and found joy on the other side. Your Honor, I know some people might look at our situation and think it's unusual. An old cowboy and a damaged teenager becoming a family. But Jake taught me that healing happens when someone sees your worth even when you can't see it yourself. He gave me hope when I thought hope was gone. He's already been my father in every way that matters. This just makes it official. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Judge Santos signed the papers with a flourish. Congratulations, Mr. Sullivan. You are now the legal guardian of Sarah Mitchell. And, Sarah, welcome to your new life. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause and congratulations. Jake pulled Sarah into a fierce hug, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. We did it, kiddo, Jake whispered into her hair. You're officially stuck with me. Good, Sarah whispered back. I wouldn't want to be stuck with anyone else. The celebration continued at the ranch that evening. Doc Harrison had brought a cake decorated with "Welcome Home, Sarah" in frosting roses. Mrs. Peterson had contributed homemade ice cream, and several neighbors had shown up with covered dishes and warm wishes. As the evening wound down and the last of their guests departed, Jake and Sarah found themselves alone on the front porch, the same spot where they'd shared so many conversations over the past months. Hard to believe it's official now, Sarah said, curled up in the swing Jake had installed just for her. How does it feel? Jake asked from his rocking chair. Like coming home after a really long, scary journey. Sarah smiled. Jake, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you ever wonder if Emma would approve of us becoming a family? Jake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. You know what I think? I think Emma orchestrated this whole thing from wherever she is now. Sarah looked surprised. Really? Really? Emma always said that love doesn't end with death, it just finds new ways to express itself. I think she sent you to me because she knew we both needed healing, and she knew we could help each other find it. I like that idea, Sarah said softly. That she's still looking out for both of us. She is. I'm sure of it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, horses moving in their stalls, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through the cottonwood trees. Jake? Sarah's voice was drowsy. I know Father's Day isn't for another month, but I got you something. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. Jake accepted the gift with surprise. Sarah, you didn't need to, just open it. Inside was a simple silver belt buckle engraved with the words "World's Best Dad" and the date of their guardianship hearing. Jake's throat tightened with emotion. Sarah. I had it made in town. I know you're not technically my father, but you're the only dad I've ever really had. The only one who counts. Jake stood up and pulled Sarah into another hug, this one even fiercer than the one in the courtroom. I love you, daughter, he said, the word feeling perfect and right. I love you too, Dad, Sarah replied, and both of them knew that the journey that had begun with a frightened phone call in the middle of the night had led them exactly where they belonged. 1 year later, Sarah stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes while Jake dried them, a routine they'd established that made the evening chores feel less like work and more like quality time. The kitchen radio played softly in the background, and the house felt warm and alive in a way it hadn't since Emma's death. Sarah had flourished in ways that amazed Jake daily. She'd not only caught up academically but was excelling in her studies. She joined the high school debate team and discovered a talent for public speaking that her English teacher insisted she pursue. More importantly, she'd learned to trust her own voice and stand up for herself and others. But it was the small moments that meant the most to Jake, the way Sarah hummed while she cooked, the sound of her laughter echoing through the house, the quiet conversations they shared during evening rides around the property. "Dad, I got accepted," Sarah said suddenly, pulling an envelope from her pocket. Jake nearly dropped the plate he was drying. "Accepted where?" "Montana State. Full academic scholarship." Sarah's grin was radiant. "I can study social work and still live close enough to come home on weekends." Jake set down the plate and swept Sarah into a spinning hug that had them both laughing. "I'm so proud of you," he said when he finally set her down. "Emma would be proud too." "I want to help other kids like me," Sarah explained, her expression growing serious. "Kids who need someone to believe in them and fight for them." "I figured, who better than someone who's been there?" Jake nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "I got a letter from Dad. He's been sober for 8 months now, and he's working as a counselor at the treatment center. He wants to know if it would be okay to visit sometime." Jake studied his daughter's face, looking for any sign of the fear that had once dominated her features when Tom was mentioned. Instead, he saw only thoughtful consideration. "How do you feel about that?" he asked. "Nervous but okay. He's not the same person who hurt me. And I'm not the same person who got hurt." Sarah's voice was confident. "Besides, I think you'd like the person he's becoming. He talks about you in his letters, says you saved both of us by being willing to do what was right instead of what was easy." "When would he want to visit?" "Next month. He could stay at the hotel in town, just come out for dinner one evening. Nothing pressure, nothing that would change our family. Just closure, maybe." Jake nodded slowly. "If you're sure you're ready, then I'm ready too." That evening, they called Tom to extend the invitation. The conversation was awkward at first, but by the end, Jake found himself looking forward to seeing the man Tom Mitchell was becoming. 2 weeks later, Tom's rental car pulled into their driveway. Jake and Sarah waited on the porch, her hand in his, both of them calm but alert. The man who got out of the car bore little resemblance to the broken, violent person Jake remembered. Tom had gained healthy weight, his eyes were clear, and he moved with the steady purpose of someone who had found his footing again. "Sarah," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion as he approached the porch. You look happy." "I am happy," Sarah replied, stepping forward to accept his tentative hug. "You look good, Dad." "Healthy." Tom turned to Jake, extending his hand. "Jake Sullivan. I owe you a debt I can never repay." Jake shook the offered hand firmly. "You don't owe me anything, Tom. But you owe Sarah a future where she never has to be afraid again." "I know. And I'm working every day to become the kind of man who deserves to be her father, even if I can't be her parent anymore." Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Tom talked about his work at the treatment center, how helping other people face their demons had helped him understand his own. Sarah shared stories about school, her plans for college, and her dreams of helping troubled kids. "I'm proud of you," Tom told her as the evening wound down. "Your mother would be proud too. You've become everything we hoped you'd be." "I had good teachers," Sarah replied, glancing meaningfully at Jake. As Tom prepared to leave, he pulled Jake aside. "I need you to know something," Tom said quietly. "I signed those papers not just because it was the right thing to do, but because I could see that she belonged with you. You gave her something I couldn't: safety and stability and unconditional love. That makes you her real father, regardless of biology." "Tom, no, let me finish. I'm grateful every day that she called you that night instead of running away or worse. You saved her life, Jake. And, in doing that, you saved mine too. The two men stood in comfortable silence for a moment, understanding passing between them. You're welcome here anytime, Jake said finally. You're part of Sarah's story, which makes you part of our family story. That doesn't change, no matter what. Tom nodded, tears in his eyes. Thank you. For everything. After Tom left, Jake and Sarah sat on the porch swing, both of them processing the emotional evening. That went better than I expected, Sarah admitted. How do you feel? Complete, somehow. Like I finally have all the pieces of my story in the right places. Sarah leaned against Jake's shoulder. He's my biological father, and I love him for the man he's becoming. But, you're my dad. The one who raised me and believed in me and taught me what love actually looks like. Emma always said that love multiplies when you share it, Jake said. Tonight proved that. There's room in your heart for both relationships, and room in mine too. Speaking of love multiplying, Sarah said, a mischievous note in her voice. I have news. Jake looked at her suspiciously. What kind of news? The kind where you might want to sit down. Oh wait, you already are. Sarah. She grinned at him. I'm dating someone. His name is David Chen, he's Margaret's nephew. He's a senior, honor roll, plans to study engineering. And, before you ask, yes, he knows about my past, and, yes, he treats me like a queen. Jake felt his protective instincts surge, but they were tempered by the confidence and joy he saw in Sarah's face. When do I get to meet this David Chen? Tomorrow. He's coming for Sunday dinner. I told him you'd probably want to interrogate him, so he's prepared. Jake laughed despite himself. Smart kid. I like him already. Dad? Sarah's voice grew serious again. Thank you for showing me that I'm worth protecting and loving and fighting for. Because of you, I know what I deserve in a relationship, and I won't settle for less. Jake's heart swelled with pride and love for this remarkable young woman who had transformed his life in ways he never could have imagined. 5 years later, Jake walked Sarah down the aisle at her wedding to David Chen. The church was packed with friends and family, including Tom Mitchell, who sat in the second row with his wife of 2 years, a kind woman named Patricia who worked as a nurse at the treatment center where they'd met. As Jake placed Sarah's hand in David's, he caught sight of Emma's picture among the family photos displayed near the altar. He could swear she was smiling. Who gives this woman to be married? The minister asked. Her family does, Jake replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. In the front row, Margaret Chen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Doc Harrison beamed with grandfatherly pride. Mrs. Peterson, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack, held her husband's hand and whispered about how love always finds a way. At the reception, Jake gave a toast that brought tears to every eye in the room. 6 years ago, I was a broken man who thought his story was over, he began. Then, a brave young woman made a phone call in the middle of the night and changed both our lives forever. Sarah, you didn't just give me a reason to keep going, you gave me a reason to hope again. You taught me that family isn't about blood or biology. It's about showing up for each other, day after day, and choosing love even when love is hard. Emma would be so proud of the woman you've become, and so am I. David, you're getting the most precious gift in the world. Take care of her heart, it's survived more than most, but it's also capable of more love than you can imagine. As the evening wound down and the last dance played, Sarah found Jake sitting alone at their table, watching the young couple with a smile on his face. Penny for your thoughts, Dad? Jake looked up at his daughter radiant in her wedding dress, her face glowing with happiness, and felt his heart overflow with gratitude. Just thinking about how funny life is. You spend all your time making plans and trying to control your destiny, and then something happens that changes everything. If someone had told me 7 years ago that the best thing in my life would start with a 2 a.m. phone call from a scared teenager, I'd have thought they were crazy. And if someone had told me that running away in the middle of the night would lead to the most beautiful life I could imagine, I wouldn't have believed them either. Sarah sat down beside him. But here we are. Here we are, Jake agreed. Mrs. Chen. Sarah laughed. It'll take some getting used to. But, I like the sound of it. I like the sound of it too. Emma would have loved David, you know. She always said the right man for you would be someone who appreciated your strength, not someone who tried to dim your light. He sees me, Sarah said simply. All of me. The broken parts and the healed parts and the parts that are still growing. Just like you taught me to see myself. Jake stood and offered Sarah his hand. One more dance with your old dad before you officially become someone else's responsibility? David's not getting responsibility for me, Sarah corrected with a grin as she accepted his hand. He's getting partnership with me. There's a difference. That's my girl, Jake said proudly. Never forget your worth. As they swayed to the music, Jake thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The fear and pain of that first night seemed like a lifetime ago, replaced by years of laughter, growth, and the deep satisfaction that comes from building something lasting together. Thank you, Sarah whispered as the song ended. For what? For answering the phone. For coming to get me. For seeing who I could become instead of just who I was. For teaching me that love is an action, not just a feeling. For being my dad in every way that matters. Jake kissed the top of her head, just as he had 1,000 times over the years when she was scared or sad or simply in need of comfort. Thank you for calling, he replied. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for making me a father. Thank you for bringing life back into my house and joy back into my world. They stood together for a moment, father and daughter, their hearts full of gratitude for the unexpected path that had led them to each other and to this perfect moment. As the reception ended and Sarah and David drove away to begin their honeymoon, Jake stood in his driveway watching their taillights disappear into the night. He wasn't sad, he was proud and hopeful and deeply content. Tom Mitchell approached him, Patricia at his side. Hell of a thing, isn't it? Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. Watching your little girl become a woman. Hell of a thing, Jake agreed. I never thanked you properly, Tom continued. For seeing what she needed when I couldn't. For being the father she deserved when I was too broken to do it myself. We all did what we had to do, Tom. You got yourself help. I provided a safe place. Sarah did the hard work of healing. It took all of us. Tom nodded, understanding. She's something special, our girl. She is that. As Tom and Patricia drove away, Jake walked back toward his house. It would be quiet now, different without Sarah's daily presence. But it wouldn't be empty. The love that had grown within these walls over the past 6 years had changed the very foundations of the place. Jake paused at the front door and looked back at the road one more time. Somewhere out there, his daughter was beginning a new chapter of her life, armed with the knowledge that she was loved, valued, and capable of anything she set her mind to. It had been a hell of a ride. And Jake Sullivan, widowed cowboy turned devoted father, wouldn't change a single moment of it. Inside the house, Emma's picture still smiled from the mantelpiece, and Jake could swear she whispered, "Well done, my love. Well done." The guardian had kept his promise. The girl had found her wings. And love, as always, had found a way.